Welcome to Unit 2.1, A Brief History of Mind-Body Medicine. I'm Diana Lindsay. Our story begins with our distant relatives, the chimpanzees. Chimps engage in self-healing behaviors. They chew and swallow leaves that are not part of their regular diet that help them heal. They swallow without chewing leaves that show up in their stools covered in parasites. They learn self-healing behaviors primarily from their mothers, but also through their individual trial and error. And they help other group mates. They help the handicapped, they lick wounds, they offer supportive and comforting behavior, and they cover or stop bleeding. Now, what about humans during our pre-written history? Well, we continue to use plants as medicine to this day. We've developed social organization around health and healing that included the rise of those most experienced or skilled in healing and the medicinal properties of plants. But our understanding of illness remained rooted in magic and religion. By 600 BC, we see the start of the written history of medicine. In Egypt, the Edwin Smith Papyrus is an ancient textbook that includes the principles of diagnosis, prognosis, and medical evaluation. Egyptians already had disease specialists in anthrax, rabies, and tetanus, even women midwives by the 4th century. By 500 BC, we see the first acupuncture texts in China, and Ayurvedic medicine rises in India. At about the same time in Greece, the Hippocratic Oath, the first written example of medical ethics that is still used today, comes in 420 BC. In 400 BC, at about the same time, the Yellow Emperor's classic of internal medicine in China forms the basis of a system of medicine that will evolve until it is interrupted by the Cultural Revolution. It often predates the Western advances we'll continue to talk about on this presentation. Greek philosophers worked to move medicine out of religion into the beginnings of a science with Aristotle in 300 BC. His treatises on human anatomy are lost, but his many works on animals advocate direct observation and anatomical comparisons. The Greeks continued to struggle with how to construct a theory of medicine. Is nature revealing herself to the observer, or is the observer imposing a doctrine on nature? They asked, does the disease dictate the treatment or the patient? Questions we still wrestle with today. And by 200 AD, Galen, the father of medicine, sums up the argument in his master treatise. Careful observation of an individual patient fit into a comprehensive theory of medicine that made those observations meaningful. Now, interestingly, their observations of human anatomy hold up much better than their theories, but his work would hold influence for 1400 years. At the fall of the Roman Empire, medicine in the West reverts to the Church. In the first hospital in Latin Christendom, founded by St. Fabriola, is in 400. The Greek medical texts, meanwhile, were preserved by Islam scholars who added their own contributions. This one, by Persian philosopher Ibn Sina, completes an encyclopedia in 5 books in 1025, which was the medical authority for another 800 years. In 1540, Greek texts like this one from Hippocrates were recovered and continued to be used for another 250 years. Advances such as the first smallpox inoculation in Europe in 1700 had already been predated by the Chinese in the 10th century. Then medicine starts to transform into the modern medicine we know today. In 1846, we have the first surgery with anesthetic. In 1870, the discovery of germ theory. 1879, the first cholera vaccine, followed by the first X-ray. And the 20th century was an explosion of innovation that's reflected in this list of innovations from Wikipedia. We discover Alzheimer's at the turn of the century, although 100 years later we still won't know how to cure it. We learn about the existence of vitamins in 1906, even though we'll continue to argue about their use even today. And we started birth control with the IUD. In the 20s, we begin modern pharmaceuticals with the discovery of insulin and the first vaccines. The first antibiotics are discovered with penicillin. The importance of vitamin D is discovered in 1921, although it will be 90 years later before we'll see a flood of research in it. Although the pace stays the same through the wars, we start to see more of current medical bag develop: chemotherapy and defibrillators, acetaminophen, the polio vaccine, pacemakers. The 60s to the 80s are an explosion. Contraceptives, oral polio, and vaccines for mumps. We see more clearly into the human body without opening it up in CT and MRI machines. And we see the last fatal case of a disease, smallpox, truly a milestone in human history. In the 80s to 2000, we see the first human heart-lung transplant, a new class of drugs called statins, which will become ubiquitous, and we end the century with the first stem cell therapy. In this century, we have drafted the human genome, begun work on our own organs in vitro, and even knowing how to print them with 3D printers. Through it all, our life expectancy has increased to 67 years, 40 more than our Neolithic ancestors. But is this solely because of our advances in medical technology and our push towards an ever more reductionist understanding of DNA, cells, and tissues? Well, not necessarily. Japan, which has the longest life expectancy of any country on earth, had a study done that attributed their social factors of equal opportunity, public hygiene, and diet to this life expectancy. And in fact, we still face big challenges, like the rise in adverse health outcomes for our children, leading to predictions that they will lead shorter lives. Researchers continue to wrestle with the challenge of how to understand, measure, and act on complex systems. Our current methods don't easily take into account the multiplicity of causes that impact our health, such as heredity, gene-environment interactions, exposure to toxic chemicals, nutrition, infectious disease, socioeconomic status, even access to nature, much less who's the individual and how he or she interacts within families, communities, and cultures. To combat serious diseases like cancer and AIDS that still don't have cures, as well as age more gracefully, some 60 million Americans now use complementary and alternative therapies. Many of these alternatives have their roots in Western traditions, but increasingly Americans are turning to the world's pharmacopoeia and the world's different medicines. And in the process, they can find themselves trying to reconcile very different theories of illness and health and very different understandings of the role of cause and effect. Now, where is the patient in all of this? Anne Harrington, a professor and chairman of the history of science at Harvard, talks about how there's another way to illness and wellness that is science-based without being reductionist nor concerned only about physical disease and treatment. There's more to healing than can be found in pills and shots, she says. Mind matters too. How one thinks, how one feels, what kind of personality or character one has or cultivates. In other words, she's coming back to the arguments the ancient Greeks had. When we have a theory, are we foregoing careful observation of the individual case? Harrington goes on to say that the questions people ask when faced with serious illness, questions like, why me? Why now? What next? Are not meaningless, but exactly the right questions, and for medical and scientific reasons, not just moral and existential ones. In her book, The Cure Within, A History of Mind-Body Medicine, Harrington tries to explain how our personal stories have been informed by common cultural narratives over the course of history. The history of medicine then is not just the advance of treatment or theory, it's about individuals straining to make personal sense of their illness and their suffering. We're going to look at these narratives throughout the course, beginning in the next video. These are the modalities that are commonly associated with mind-body healing. Mind-focused ones such as meditation or visualization, hypnosis, body-focused like nutrition and exercise in the Western culture, or Qigong and Tai Chi in Asian cultures, as well as spirit-based, traditional religious practices, spiritual practices, or what I call the ancient protocols of laughter, optimism, hope, and gratitude. But in this course, we'd like to go beyond a description of individual modalities to focus on the question, how can we each strive for our own optimal health? This course will focus on how we get and stay well compared to why we get sick and which magic bullet can cure us. This approach has been called salutogenesis by medical sociologist Aaron Antonovsky and was first used in his book, Health, Stress, and Coping. He believed that it had 6 assumptions. People are always on a scale between health and illness. Where we are on that spectrum is determined by our entire life situation. So we should look for salutary factors that keep us well, not just our risk factors. Stress, which was just being researched in the 80s when he was writing, can be not only harmful, but neutral or even positive, because we are constantly in an adaptive state to disease or stress. We can actively learn from the deviant case, the individual, and that's why in this course we'll focus on your health and share it with others like you. Our challenge for all of us that we believe is worthy of our time and engagement is, can we at minimum, like the chimps, engage in self-healing behaviors, learn self-healing behaviors, and help each other? And can we do it in a way that pushes our evolution further to realize the full potential of our minds, our spirits, and the wonder that is our bodies? So to begin, go back to your journal and think about your own brief personal history with medicine and different healing modalities. What is your most satisfactory experience with a provider of healthcare? And what is your least one? And share them in your small groups. Thank you.